Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the very first Essential Talks. We're talking about business insurance today, following the recent news. I'm Yvonne, your host this morning. I'm from Essential Print Services based on Pride Park in Derby. And this morning, I'm delighted to have Chris Mallet with me. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Yvonne. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thanks.
Good. Chris, tell the viewers who are watching live and on catch up who you are, what are your credentials, and why on earth should we listen to your advice this morning?
So, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, I'm Chris Mallet from Aston Lark in Derby. I'm the head of our Derby branch. A fair few of your viewers might know us previously as Bell & Co, as we were back up until 2017. And we look after businesses of all sizes across Derby, Derbyshire and the wider East Midlands. We've got about 3,500 clients, and I personally have spent more years than I care to remember really working in the insurance industry and looking after all sorts of clients across all sorts of sectors, from one-man bands right the way up into international companies trading all over the world. So hopefully I can bring a bit of knowledge and experience to a topic that sometimes is a little bit clouded in mystery.
Well, yeah, I can just safely say I think we can trust your opinion and judgment there. And just for the record, Aston Lark are not Essential Print Services insurance provider. This collaboration came about through an introduction through a lady that I know called Becky Hitchcock. Good morning, Becky. Shout out to you. So thank you very much for that, Becky. So I wanted to. And I was personally very interested in the recent news, and I thought, well, if I am, other people are. And I don't think many people know about it. Maybe they think, oh, that's not for me. Let's get straight into it, Chris, if that's all right. Because we're only here for half an hour, and I know these things absolutely fly by. So, in general, Chris, before we get on to the news subject, how do we make insurance more exciting? Because I know from my personal experience, when it gets to this time of year, it's roundabout now that I look at renewing my business insurance. It's something that I put off. I absolutely dread. I find it boring as hell. How can we make the subject of business insurance more sexier? Over to you, Chris Mallet.
I'm not sure I'm the best poster boy for making insurance sexy, but that's by the by. I would love, Von, to have a magic wand and be able to be that person who waves it and suddenly makes the process of arranging insurance exciting. I think that's probably a little bit beyond me and probably a little bit beyond everyone else as well. We're a bit like speaking to the taxman, unfortunately. It's never going to be something that's going to be top of your list as a business owner in terms of exciting things that you want to do. What I think we should be doing though as insurance brokers and as an industry is, if we can't make things exciting and sexy, we should at least take the pain away from arranging your insurance.
Yes.
And as I'm sure you know, this time of year for you and Essential Print Services, you'll be getting bombarded with calls of people wanting to talk to you about insurance. You might be sitting down with someone and having to go over really everything about your business from scratch every single year. And that's not the way we should approach things as an insurance industry. We should make things easy. We should understand our clients' businesses. We should make those conversations once a year all about what's happened in the business over the last 12 months. But you don't want me turning up, speaking to you, and you having to explain every year what the difference between a lithographic printer and a digital printer is. And I've done my homework. That's not what you want. You've got enough to worry about in running your business, and all small businesses do. So it's about getting in touch with and aligning with an insurance broker who takes the time to understand you and then can help you when they come and see you every year. It's not about explaining things from scratch again. It's about what's happened in the last 12 months and sharing a bit of experience as well. We're business owners, business operators ourselves, and it's about what's happening in our business that might help you and vice versa, whilst also getting the job done of ticking off your insurance requirements and keeping things protected for the next year.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. It's just having to go through the information over and over again. And like to say, you wanted to find out what your clients are going through over the past 12 months, and what a hell of a 12 months it's been. It's just some of the stories that you guys must be hearing are just going to be just unmanageable. unimaginable. So next question for you, Chris. So people starting businesses, even in the pandemic, what should they be looking to get themselves covered for? What is the absolute minimum for a new startup, a young business or a small business, a limited company, and also someone who's operating as a sole trader? What do they need to look out for?
So there's a couple of things, Von, that people should be really, really concerned with or sit at the top of their priority list when it comes to insurance. And those are largely because they're types of insurance that you have to buy by law. So I think we all know from our own personal cars that you can't be driving around without adequate motor insurance in place. So if you're setting up a business or you're operating a small business and you have 1, 2 or a fleet of vehicles out on the roads, you absolutely need to make sure that you've got the right motor insurance in place. And you should additionally make sure that that motor insurance matches exactly who's going to be driving the vehicles. There's no point buying it with just yourself named down if there's going to be staff in the office using the vehicle, if there's going to be people of certain ages, certain level of experience. That's something to be really, really careful of. The other legally required insurance is employer's liability insurance. So if you're a limited company or you employ anyone within your business, with certain limited exceptions, you should have employer's liability cover in place. You have to, by law, buy £5 million worth of coverage. The market in general provides 10 million as standard, but it's absolutely something that you have to have. The only exceptions to that, if you're a sole trader or you're a small family business where it's direct family members only who are working for you, then it might not necessarily be legally required. But certainly if you're a limited company and certainly if you've got any employees outside of that family scope, it's something that you should have in place. No. And then beyond that, it's about protecting your business. So you might find yourself in a situation where some of your contracts with your customers require you to have certain levels of either public liability insurance that protects you if a member of the public suddenly trips over in your premises or you do something to damage someone else's property, or professional indemnity insurance. If you're providing any sort of professional advice or service, it might be that your clients insist you have a certain level of cover there, or indeed that might be a requirement of your regulatory body, the professional body that looks after you. So those are some key things to consider. And of course, above and beyond that, making sure that you cover your property as well. It may be quite easy to respond to a loss if all you do is use one laptop, few £100 and you could pop down to the shops when we're allowed and buy a new one. But if you've got any sort of specialist or expensive equipment within your business, certainly if you've got office premises or manufacturing premises and you've got a lot of contents in there, you might own the buildings as well. You don't want to be in a situation where something happens and you're not protected and you're taking that hit on your own bottom line.
Absolutely. No, that's really well put. Thank you very much, Chris. And before we go to the next question, just a reminder for those who are watching this live or on catch up, please do send in your questions and comments. And if it is on catch up, we will promise to get back to you at some point. So please do send in your comments and questions because it's a really important subject. Chris, business insurance does cost a lot of money, especially for small businesses. What can we do to bring the cost down? Is there any way of reducing the costs?
Absolutely, Von. The first thing is obviously making sure that you're aligned with a good quality broker who's shopping around the insurance market for you. So it's all too tempting to think about insurance, think I just want it done and dusted and pop on to a particular insurer's website. But actually you don't get the benefit of understanding, are they pricey? Are they a little bit cheap? And also, how does the cover stack up? Am I actually going to be protected if I have a claim to make? And so getting in touch with a good quality broker who can do that shopping around for you is really important. But there's also stuff that you can do in your business that's going to help you bring that cost down. So having a focus on the risk that sits within your business, making sure that you're putting in place risk assessments for particularly risky activity, making sure that you're training your staff effectively to help them minimize the risks. And if you've got people out on the road, making sure that you check their driving licenses, that you're not handing over the keys to someone who might have a driving ban or might have been caught doing some speeds that they perhaps shouldn't have done whilst they're buzzing around previously. Doing all those sorts of things and then communicating those sorts of things with your broker really helps in terms of when they're engaging with insurers, really selling the quality of your business, selling to an insurer that actually your business is better than average. You do the right things, you care about risk management, you take the time and put the effort into making sure that you're not going to get claims. And if you do that, and if you can prove that, and if you communicate it to your broker effectively, you're in with a much better shout of keeping those costs down versus paying over the odds.
Fantastic. I love that. Above the average, better than average. One of the things on our office wall, Chris, it says, we're not here to be average, we're here to be awesome. So yeah, I love that. Love that. So on to the recent news, which brought us together this morning. So can you tell us about the recent news regarding the business interruption insurance and how it impact businesses?
Absolutely, Von. And this is obviously something that a lot of businesses across the country who've been hit by COVID, have not been able to open their doors, have been really, really keen to see some conclusion on. Obviously, we're 10, 11 months in now from the initial COVID lockdown, and that's been an incredibly testing time for a lot of our clients, for a lot of businesses across Derby and across the wider region. And so this time last week, getting the Supreme Court judgment on a test case that was brought by the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator, about whether or not businesses can claim for COVID interruptions. Really, really important. I think what's also important, though, is to mention that whilst we might have all flipped over to the news or seen those notifications pop up on our phones last Friday morning when the judgment came out, whilst they were all very, very positive and talked in terms of all businesses being able to get some money back from their insurers, it's unfortunately the case that that's not the reality of the situation. As with all sort of Supreme Court cases, it was only a number of very specific points of law or interpretations of the contracts of insurance that were actually considered by the Supreme Court. And the first thing that's really, really important to mention is that the Supreme Court case only really considered 21 example policy wordings from 8 different insurers. And the anticipation from the FCA themselves is that really this only impacts probably about 370,000 businesses across the UK. And we put that into context, and as much as figures might fluctuate, there are probably 5.8, 5.9 million small businesses across the UK. So as much as I hate to be the bearer of bad news, really this judgment only affects probably 6 or 7% of the businesses out there.
Gosh.
It's a tough situation for businesses, but for those businesses who are affected, there is at least some positive news. The thing that we need to take into consideration is exactly what circumstances these businesses can actually claim. And the Supreme Court were really clear on 3 specific points that we find quite often within policy wordings about whether or not there's going to be any cover provided. So the first one is infectious diseases. Doesn't sound great, does it? And certainly probably not one of those sections of a policy wording that even insurance brokers will have spent too much time discussing with their clients. I mean, we all know this time last year, there weren't many of us who thought a pandemic of this scale and with this impact were on the horizon.
Anyone's business plan, so that's for sure.
If you were planning and thinking about infectious diseases this time last year, then hats off to you, because I don't think many of us were. So the infectious diseases clauses that we see within wordings really extend on traditional business interruption cover to closure of premises because of an outbreak of infectious disease. So if you couldn't get into your premises, clearly there's an infectious disease that's floating around in the form of COVID, there might be some cover afforded under the policy. The challenge with those clauses is, though, that a lot of insurance policies will have specifically named the infectious diseases covered. And if you're an insurance broker like me, you'll be all too used to looking at policy wordings and seeing lists of typhoid, cholera, all of these diseases that perhaps haven't been around in any sort of form for hundreds of years, being the only diseases that are actually covered. Unfortunately, we didn't know that COVID was around sort of 18 months, 2 years or so ago. So a lot of those clauses that specify the diseases down there don't, unfortunately, afford any cover. However, there are some clauses out there that take a more general approach. They're infectious diseases, and there's no specific definition of what the insurer means by those infectious diseases, which means that largely if there has been an outbreak within a certain radius of your business, then you might be able to make a claim. A lot of insurers work on the basis of an outbreak within a mile of your premises, and some work on the basis of broader spectrums. I've seen up to 25 miles probably as the largest radius there. So if you've got one of those infectious disease clauses, if there's no specific definition of the diseases, which opens the door to COVID, and there's been an outbreak within a mile of your business, then it may well be the case that you're in a position to make a claim. And that was really positive news from the Supreme Court. There are a couple of other clauses, Von, that sit in policy wordings that are also important to consider. There's what's known as prevention of access clauses, where a local authority says you're not allowed to get into your premises and that interrupts your trade. Unfortunately, the news there is slightly less positive. And the Supreme Court, I should say, have taken more of a view that actually, in those circumstances, the clauses are more designed for if something happens at the end of the street, if there's a bomb scare or something like that, and there's very specific lockdown of a particular area, that there would be cover. When it comes to COVID, it's not the same situation. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court judgment really sort of reiterates what's gone before in the High Court and the insurer's position that there's not so much cover there. And then the final one to consider really relates primarily to a lot of Hiscox policyholders. And we've seen lots and lots of stuff in the news about Hiscox in particular, with claims management, claims action groups springing up back at the outset of COVID to address Hiscox in particular. And they have a sort of hybrid clause that sits within their wording that takes bits from infectious diseases and takes bits from that prevention of access clause and might provide some cover. Now, the Supreme Court were positive when it comes to Hiscox clients who have that hybrid clause in their wording. It was the case that was found to provide some cover for businesses, but it only applies if your business has been subject to mandatory closure through legislation. So for restaurants, for cafes, for hairdressers for a time, for gyms, there could well be some cover afforded there. But for professional services businesses like us as an insurance broker, unfortunately, because there was no mandatory closure, then it's not necessarily the case that despite being insured with Hiscox and despite having the right clause in your wording, that there'll be any cover available, unfortunately, for those sorts of clients. So it's those three clauses, Von, that are the key things really to consider when people are looking at their business interruption cover and whether or not they might be able to claim.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. For instance, if you're a restaurant owner, you can't open as usual, but you are using the premises as a takeaway. Are you still able to claim if your policy allows it?
If the policy allows it, one of the good things about the Supreme Court judgment is that they will allow for claims for part reduction in businesses. So that example is a great one of people being resilient, people being innovative, people adapting to the challenges of COVID by taking their traditional sit-down restaurant businesses and turning them into takeaways. So in those circumstances, it's clear from the Supreme Court judgment that there is scope to claim, even though it might only have been a partial interruption. But of course, as I say, that's all dependent on there being one of those clauses that's going to allow some cover in the broader policy terms and conditions. But good news on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from Helen from Butler's Pantry, Chris, if I can share that with you. Do you need the infectious diseases extension to the business interruption cover in order to make a claim? We have just touched on that as well. And she mentioned extension there, which is quite an interesting word.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that all of those three clauses could well fall under a header within your policy wording of business interruption extensions. And the reason for that is that traditional business interruption, the core bit of covering your policy, is all based around damage to your premises. It's about if something happens, a fire, a flood, something else that damages your premises, That's the core section, or core part, I should say, of business interruption cover. And those infectious diseases, or the prevention of access, or the hybrid clauses, are extensions because they don't necessarily require the same level of damage to trigger. But in answer to Helen's question here, obviously I've mentioned there that infectious diseases is one of those clauses that does look to provide some cover under the policy. The really key thing for Helen to be conscious of is whether that infectious diseases extension specifies those specific diseases that are covered, as I've mentioned, or whether it's broader, doesn't specify the specific diseases that are covered. And that's the position that would potentially open the door for a claim.
Now, the word COVID, if your policy is like mine, due for renewal around about now, it wouldn't have had the word COVID in that list. If you are thinking about it, I mean, would that be a problem?
So that is the problem where we've got that specified list. Because COVID's not listed there, then it's not covered by the policy, unfortunately. Those specified disease extensions only extend if there was an outbreak of one of normally sort of 20 or 30 diseases that are noted down there. So is it typhoid? Is it plague? Is it cholera? Some pretty nasty stuff on there. And so that would be a problem. If you're seeing a list of specific diseases in your wording, COVID clearly won't be on there because it wasn't a known disease up until sort of this time last year. And unfortunately, that means you won't be in a position to make a claim.
People are watching this, Chris, and they think, actually, I might be in for a chance to make a claim here. What can they claim for, and what information do they need to make that claim? Or are the insurers contacting people themselves? Because I'm sure that insurance companies across the land, after hearing the news, they had an influx of calls from people saying, I want to make a claim, and you're like, no, wait a minute, we don't know what's happening yet. So if people think, actually, I think I might be covered here, what can they claim for, and what information do they need?
So under that extension, or under those extensions where there might be cover on, it's all about covering reduction in your revenue and potentially increased cost of working that you've had to incur over the course of this COVID period. Now, when we talk about loss of revenue, what will happen is typically any furlough payments that have gone to your staff, if you've furloughed staff, would be taken off any claims settlement. And that's because, of course, you've not incurred those costs of keeping the staff on the books during the period that they've been furloughed. But when it comes to grants that any small businesses might have received, the Supreme Court were really clear that insurers can't factor those in and reduce their claims payout accordingly.
Oh, okay. I was just about to ask you about grants. That's a positive, yeah.
It'd be really unfair if any small businesses got a grant of, say, £10,000, and then their insurer reduced the amount they were paying out by £10,000, because the only person who's won there is the insurer rather than the small business. That's not what the grants were designed for. And so if you are in a position where you're working out what you want to claim for, it's one to be really conscious of. And your broker should be supporting you through this process, but be really conscious that you don't find insurers trying to take grants out of the equation, because the Supreme Court was really, really clear that they shouldn't be taken out of scope. So it's about the reduction in your business. It's about potentially the increased costs that you've incurred as well. In terms of PPE, there's a really interesting nuance when it comes to those increased costs, that a lot of insurance policies work on the basis that you have to spend £1 to save £1 effectively. And if you're spending more money than you're saving, had you not spent the money, then sometimes policies might not pay out on that basis. My big bit of advice when it comes to these business interruption claims, first and foremost, if you're unsure at all about whether or not you can claim, get in touch with your insurance broker. That's exactly what we're here as insurance brokers to do, to support our clients through these tricky sorts of processes. We at Aston Lark have written out to all of our clients, and will be doing so continually as the situation develops. If you can make a claim, work with your insurance broker to quantify exactly what you can and can't claim for. Again, policy wordings can be a little bit intricate around things that are covered and things that are not. And so this is again where brokers should be stepping up and helping our clients work out exactly what they can claim for and not leaving anything on the table. The last thing we want is pounds and pence that could come back to businesses being sat still in insurers' pockets because we've not recognised the full scope of cover. And then when it comes to insurers themselves, there's absolutely an obligation on insurers to deal with this process quickly. Our anticipation is that over the course of the next few days, we'll start to see insurers directly getting in touch with affected clients. We've seen that already over the last few days with Christopher. I've seen a few of my clients getting in touch and the others should follow suit. And there's absolutely an obligation now for them to get things moving as quickly as possible. So for businesses who might not have got anything logged by way of a claim previously, might think that there's now opportunity. Get in touch with your broker. Start off with some basic information. Your business, when did you close? Is it a mandatory closure? Did you close partially? Have you changed your activities, as we spoke about before, or have you done anything new that's maybe offset some of that revenue reduction? And then it's over to your broker really to pick up with your insurer and make sure that they can start the process and keep it moving as quickly as possible.
Thanks for that, Chris. Now, the question to you is, okay, for instance, maybe we can make a claim and we make that claim, and obviously not all claims are awarded, but let's say we do get some money from our insurance companies. Will that only make the policy next year more expensive?
I think this is again where your broker should be providing some real good quality advice, because we all know that the general rule, unfortunately, is that if you make a claim, the price might go up in future years. And it's important to note that the insurance market more generally, unfortunately, at the moment is being characterised by prices going up. Yeah. So it's important to have the conversation with your broker about actually the cost benefit of making a claim, because if you make a claim for £100, you wouldn't expect the price to go up. If you make a claim for £5,000, it might be a certain increase next year. If you make a claim for £500,000, you're undoubtedly going to see quite a significant increase in the following year. It's about working with your broker to understand what your particular insurer's approach is to claims and to price increases more generally, and then work through based on the individual specifics of your claim, whether or not it's of value to make that claim and whether or not you want to pursue it.
Okay, we've got a question that's come in, if that's okay, Chris. It's from Andy. If you've changed provider since the start of COVID, would you still be able to go back to the original insurance provider and look at a claim?
So it's a great question, Andy. And the answer is yes, absolutely. The way in which business interruption policies work is they're based on when a claim first occurred rather than the policy and the insurer that you have in place at the time you actually then choose to make a claim. So when you're thinking about these business interruption claims, if you have changed your insurer, changed your provider over the course of the last 10, 11, 12 months, make sure that you're reviewing the insurer who was protecting you as of really 19th, 20th, 21st of March of last year, because the way in which insurance policies work are very much that it would be that policy that picked up any business interruption related loss. And what you'll generally find is that since March of last year, unfortunately, insurers have responded to the situation with COVID by putting exclusions into policies. So anything that you might have renewed since, unfortunately, is very likely to include an outright exclusion for COVID. So absolutely speak to your insurer who was protecting you back as of March of last year.
At that time. Yeah, and my next question, Andy, was going to ask you about changes in policies since COVID, particularly in my instance where I'm now looking to renew. What should we be looking out for? If we want to stick to the same insurance provider, insurance broker from one year to the next, what should we be looking out for? What changes in policy should we be looking out for to make sure that we're covered?
The big thing to look out for, Von, is those COVID exclusions, as I've mentioned. So unfortunately, because of the scale of the situation, insurers are generally putting an exclusion around any COVID business interruption as standard pretty much. the moment. But what people should be really, really conscious of is that some insurers are going further than that, and they might be excluding anything to do with COVID from potentially the public liability or the employer's liability parts of your cover. And for lots and lots of businesses who either might still be operating in a manufacturing setting or are preparing, hopefully, to reopen the doors and have the public back in, if you're then faced with an exclusion to any sort of COVID cover, I should say, you're facing a really tricky situation if an employee or a member of the public gets in touch and says, I think I got COVID when I was in your premises and I'm taking you to court for it. We all know that it's going to be really, really tricky for people to prove where and when they've got COVID. But at the same time, your policy is there not only to cover compensation, but to cover your legal costs. And if you're finding that your insurer is applying that blanket exclusion for COVID, you could be in a situation where someone alleges that you're negligent, you've not had the sanitizer out, you've not insisted on masks being worn, you've not taken people's temperature. They're going to sue you, and you're facing those legal defense costs yourself because your insurer has applied that exclusion. So that's a big one for people to look out for, and it's a big one that us as brokers should be talking to and flagging up and highlighting to all of our clients when we hit that point of renewal. Goodness
me, your world is just an absolute rabbit warren of possibilities. I don't know how you guys are coping right now, but that is just blowing my mind. But we have passed the half an hour mark, Chris. I told you it was absolutely flyby, so thank you so much. So if I was one of your customers and I phoned you up and the prospect of making a claim would potentially mean my policy going up in cost next year, and my policy doesn't cover anything to do with COVID-related loss of sales or interruption, and I say to you, Chris, so what's the point in me having insurance? What would you say to those people? I know it's a tough one, but what would you say to people? I think first and foremost, I understand how hard hit businesses are, and it's across all sectors. Everyone's feeling the pain of COVID, and my heart goes out to those business owners who are really up against it in terms of the future of their business. And I get the challenge. I understand why people would say something big's happened, I'm not covered, what's the point in it? My response to that would always be, there's plenty of other big stuff that, unfortunately, as much as we might not like to think about it, there's plenty of big stuff that can also happen that is picked up by your insurance. So think about the news this week. Storm Christoph, not particularly well named from my perspective, but as much as COVID has dominated our focus, there's no, unfortunately, guarantee that the next big storm doesn't come along and you find your premises flooded, or something happens, there's a wiring fault and it burns down, or someone, particularly at the moment, is hard up, looks for an opportunity to get some money in the bank, comes into your premises and slips over and decides that, right, they're going to take you to court. It's all of those sorts of eventualities where insurance is there to protect you and means that you can still go to sleep at night knowing that if one of those things happens, your business is covered and you don't find the situation where you're footing the bill yourself. Wow. Well, thank you very much. We've got some comments that's come in, Chris. If you're okay to hang on just for a couple more minutes. Helen, I said very informative. Thank you, Chris and Van. Thank you very much, Helen. Alison says, thank you both very much. Very interesting and informative. Could Chris put his contact details up as my insurance is due to be renewed? Oh, wow. There's a potential there. Thank you very much for that, Alison. But yeah, that leads me on very seamlessly to say, Chris, if anyone wants to get in touch with you for any advice or if their renewals are up, how do we find you? Where's the best place to contact you? So you can get in touch with me directly. We'll obviously publish my email address and my contact number sort of after the talk through the Facebook pages, but Christopher.Mallet, you can see the spelling of Mallet down there, at astonlark.com. Feel free to drop me a note. And I'm sure we'll publish the contact details for our broader Derby branch as well. We've got a fantastic team of 25 people who work in Derby at the cricket ground, who are all local, support Derby businesses,
and would be more than happy to have a conversation and work out what we could do to help you out.
Chris, thank you. I know you're a really busy guy. Really, thank you so much for answering those questions and making it much clearer for small businesses like myself. So again, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll end the broadcast there. Thank you very much. Say goodbye to viewers.
Thanks, man. Bye, everyone.
Bye.